Hi, this is Graham from letmebefree.com. I just want to give you a quick introductory session to my expert advisor called Zone Trader Tutor, just to give you a good idea of how to get started with it and some of the things that you can do. So here I have a chart, the Euro Dollar daily chart. I'm just going to drop my expert advisor onto the chart. Straight away you see a list of parameters. We will just enter the details here, which is my username, and if you subscribe you'll choose a username and you'll automatically be given a license key. Now I've set this up for myself right now, so I don't actually have to enter it, but it will be something like 4 digits and another dash and another 4 digits, another 4 digits, and so forth. So when you just OK that, you find that goes off, it authenticates, and then it displays a whole list of lines on the chart. Now you can switch between time frames. Here we have monthly, here they apply in green, weekly will be blue, daily is in red, H4 is in purple, and you can go right through the time frames down to M30 is the last one that is set by default. You can actually change this by these two settings here, which is the highest time frame, which we have monthly, and the lowest time frame, which is 30. Let's say we want to go right down to the 5 minutes, which I don't generally advise, but just for demonstration purposes. OK that. Give it a second to calculate. And there's 30 minutes. We go down to 15-minute chart and the 5-minute chart. The 5 minutes is a little bit pale in this blue. These colours are generally chosen to fit well on a white background, but they do equally work well on a black background as well. We prefer doing that. So I'll just come back to the day chart. Now, one of the principles of this expert advisor is that we tend to draw zones of supply and demand, and the idea is that it tries to pick out every single zone on the chart initially, and then we use various parameters to filter these down to the ones that we think are going to be high probability zones that we can either sell from supply or buy from demand. Now let me go to the weekly, just show you the difference. So at the top we have the areas of supply, which are all prefixed by S, and a few more down here. You'll notice that they get quite clustered around here because it's quite choppy, this kind of action here. And so we've got the supply zone down here, which is given supply. So it's a very messy chart here. Not necessarily the best one to choose, certainly on this time frame. I go up to the daily, you see you've got lots of supply zones, S. The number after it refers to the number of retests of that zone. So you can see that all these numbers are 3, 4, 8. They're all generally quite high, although the demand is quite low. So that means that there's been quite a lot of retests of supply, so more likely price is going to go up. Just come down a couple of levels here. H4 is quite a nice chart for trading intraday, so I do tend to pay quite a lot of attention to this one. Here we can see areas of demand have been forming. Got two areas here, another one here, and here. Then we've got this longer term supply zone, which is exactly where its prices come up to hit and is kind of like stabilised at the end of the week. And it's kind of looking like that may well send price back down a bit. It's tried to come back, it's hit this demand zone here, and it's just bouncing around in between this supply zone here and this demand zone here. So it's all a little bit messy, but it's this is how it works. So what we really want to do when we're actually trading these zones is try and get rid of some of the clutter, and just display the sort of things that we want to see. Now there's a number of things that we can do. We can change the zones that we see on a particular chart, for instance. So we have display customization here. We can have, at the moment we've got child only, which means we see H4 zones on the H4 chart and daily zones on the daily chart and so forth. But we may want to see the child with daily zones. So if we're trading intraday but we still want to see where supply and demand on the daily chart is, we set child with daily. So we'll go ahead and do that now. A second to calculate, and we will see the red lines for the daily and the purple lines for the H4. We go to H1, You see the magenta lines and still the daily on the chart, so the daily will be there right through these lower time frames. Now this is obviously a little bit cluttered to say the least. There's a lot of lines on here and we don't want to see all this because it doesn't give us help too much. So as I said earlier, the whole premise is that we have a lot of filters on here where we can actually start reducing these zones down and just seeing the ones we're interested in. One of the key ones that I think a lot of people will jump on straight away is the trend. So we have a number of trend filters. We'll just scroll down a little bit here. We have bias, so we can have up to 4 settings, and if you look at the drop down list here, we have we can set up and down if we only want to see supply zones or demand zones, or we can look at the higher time frame trend as well, or 2 higher time frame trends and base this on that, or we can pick a particular time frame whose trend we want to use to set our bias. So for example, we look at the daily trend in this instance. Okay, this, give it another second to calculate. Okay, so what we notice here when we're talking about trend is up the top here we have the list of the trend directions for each of the time frames that we're calculating. So I can just take this off and scroll it across maybe to make it a little bit clearer. Okay, so we have MN1, monthly is down, weekly it's up, daily is up, H4 is down, H1 is down, M30 is down, M15 is down, M5 is down. So we've just asked it to set our bias on the day chart, which is up. So what we'll find is, if we just bring it back to the beginning there, is that all the supply zones are actually slightly lighter here and the demand zones are thicker. Now this can still be a little bit cluttered for you, so there is the option of actually changing the thickness here. We can set this to disappear completely. Before I do that, and I will do that in a second, the thin lines, you can just hover over them and you can see that it says inactive reason bias 1, which is saying that these are thin because they don't agree with the first bias we've put. We'll just do it over a thicker line. It doesn't have any reason for it. For demand zones, they're in line with the bias, they're okay. If I go to a smaller time frame, again we've got these supply zones which are all a light line. Let's get rid of those now. So we're going to set them to actually width inactive zones to width 0. Okay. You find that now all we've got in the 1 hour time frame is magenta demand zones. We go through, same with H4, even on H5 we've only got demand zones, so these would be areas where we might look to be buying when price comes back to retest. Here's a great example. Again, it's coming back to retest, it's gone further into the zone here, but looks like it might push out. I wouldn't really trade the 5 minutes. Certainly not against day trend because it's way too big a difference. H1 tends to be my favourite intraday time frame. H4 can be quite a good one as well. So here, for example, prices come back to this demand zone. You might want to be looking to buy here, but of course there are a lot of other factors involved which would influence our ultimate decision. So, like I said, we can change the bias settings according to how we think we might want to trade. If, for example, we've just looked at the chart, eyeballed it, we can just say, well, actually, we ain't want to trade down on this chart for whatever reason. So we set bias down. Okay, give it a second to recalculate, and now all we see is on the small time frames is supply. So there's a supply there, and there's a supply which had formed some time ago and which price just came up to hit. Let's go to the smaller. Again, all of these supply zones are above current price, which is what we're going to find for supply. Of course, daily, because we're using the filter, based on the day time frame, that will not be filtered at all. You'll see both supply and demand. Okay, so we have some demand down here, so I create supply down here. Oh, I apologise, I actually changed it to just down there, didn't I? Let's change it back to the bias being based on daily, and I'll demonstrate what I was just saying there. So there it's down, so all time frames will only see supply zones. If we actually base it on the daily time frame, then it'll be the smaller time frames that have that bias set, whereas the daily and upwards we see both supply and demand zones. So we see here again H4, we just see the demand zones and all the lower time frames underneath. Of course, we could actually set a couple of filters, so we may only want to see zones where when both the daily and the weekly are in agreement. Of course, if they're not in agreement, then we just won't see anything at the moment, and that will be, let's see what comes up. So we see the weekly is up and daily is up, so at the moment we only see demand zones for any time frame. Now, just to minimise the zones we see on the chart, I'm just going to get rid of the child with daily and go back to child only. This is my preferred way to trade, with just the time frame of interest on the chart. But for demonstration purposes, I just wanted to show you with the daily on there. So here we have the 1 hour, 4 hour. So we've got demand zones only on this chart. Now, one thing which can be quite useful regarding the bias settings, so we just come down to them now, and we'll see there's actually a number at the bottom. Now this actually allows you to change how far back the bias applies. So we may only want to have demand zones that formed, zones that formed within the, say, last 30 candles being affected by bias, in which case we just set this to 30. And what this means is that zones that formed some time ago, in this case, you know, for example, we've got the bias, we set the bias to just based on the daily, which you see is up, so typically we'd only get demand zones, but we may want to see supply zones if they occurred more than 30 candles ago, because these may work as good targets for a trade that we want to enter against a demand zone. So okay, that. You see that these supply zones, which formed quite a long time ago, they've actually appeared now. So, but we don't get anything in the shorter immediate term. Now the reason I've done this is because occasionally price will come back a little bit further or create a supply zone, but we want to keep our generic trend, longer term trend intact, so we don't want this to affect the results unless it goes, price continues staying below that pivot point for some time and the trend is generally accepted to be changed. So this is just an example of using bias. There's actually a whole list of different things that you can do with this, and it's way too much to go into one session, so I'll just give you a quick overview of some of the things we can do. So we have zone attribute filters, so these are some of the key ones to look at. We may just want to focus on one particular zone. This is where we can enter a list of different IDs, one or more. So for instance, when we come to trading, we may have done some analysis and decided we want to enter a trade at a particular level, zone level. So if I cancel this and say we just want to trade whenever price comes back to this particular zone. If we hold the mouse over it, we can see that there's a number. Likewise, if we just double click on it, underline properties, what we do is just take this H4 underscore and the number, copy that, and then we just go to the zone attributes area as before. You can enter that in there. Okay. you see this is the only zone appeared. Now you may wonder why you want to do that. This is really when it comes down to setting the auto trading going. Only the zones that appear on the chart with this thick line, or the line we've set, thickness we've set, are tradable against. And there are other factors we can bring in whether to trade against them, but as far as displaying the zones on the chart, it will only initially, it will exclude all the inactive zones. So we may just want to focus on this one zone and making sure that the other trading criteria we set are aligned with it. Anything else we're not interested in. Okay, so I'm just going to reset everything back. Just put my name and just a random key, because as I said, I set that up so I won't do anything for my thing at the moment. One useful thing is if you want to just save this as a default set, I often call mine no limits, or you may think no filters. Just got the authentication information in it. Save. Okay. What this means is that whenever we go to another chart, so I'll just add, let's say, the Aussie. You can drop this expert advisor on the chart, load, and bring no filters in, and it automatically populates with all my settings, which saves me having to remember what they are and re-enter them every time. Now just take that one step further. When this is okay, you can actually save this as a template as well. So this could be your baseline template. So all you have to do is save template. I have one called baseline. Let's call it baseline 2. Save. Now we'll just go to another chart, USD CAD, being baseline 2. It actually now I'll show you why it's got all these extra lines in a second. A little trick I'll show you, it's actually got some lines left on from the AUD USD chart. So what I generally do is I actually clear all the objects off before I save it as template. So if I go back to the Aussie dollar again, I'll just clear the objects off, save that as template, call it baseline 2, overwrite it, yes, and then just apply baseline 2. And here you see all the zones appearing as we'd expect, and we can do the usual things like applying filters and so forth. So this is an interesting chart here, the USD CAD. See, we've got this supply zone up here, prices come back, retested the zone and then dropped away, creating a couple of extra supply zones in the process, which have in themselves been retested, or this one up here has been retested a couple of times, and then dropped away. So even if we don't get into this first retest here, we may want to see what happens first. Often price does drop away and then retest this first supply zone that's formed afterwards. And the other way we can trade these things is we can look for retest of a daily or weekly zone and then look to the smaller time frames to actually get a much better entry with low risk involved. So what I'm going to do here is just, like I had before, just to show you the idea, show the chart with the daily time frame. Okay. So we've got this, look at the ID ends in 968. So we go to the 1 hour chart, just squish it up a little bit more. This is the daily zone that we're interested in, and this is where it's come into and hit the zone. So we could actually look to trade off these supply zones that start forming once it's actually inside this daily zone. And look to just sort of getting early on the new daily trend that might form as it rejects this daily zone, but obviously reducing our risk much further by entering using the 1 hour chart. Now, typical feature that we may want to do is we may only actually want to see zones that actually fall inside a higher time of the zone. So again, this is one of many parameters, and they are all detailed in a instruction manual sorts, which if you go to book.letmebefree.com you can take a look at anytime you want. So if we just scroll down, there's a whole list of other things. Bias filters that we're looking at before, price curve filters. Price curve filters are very interesting. I'll come back to those in a little while. Zone overlap filters is what I'm looking at the moment. So you can see only use zones that fall inside a higher time frame zone. So we're going to say that's true, and we're going to set the higher time frame zone to be the daily chart. We OK that. You can see we've got the daily ones here, and only these 1 hour zones which fall inside these daily supply zones here are actually going to be shown. You can see there's nothing down here. These are all inactive, which because they don't fall inside the zone, and if you hold the mouse over it you see the bottom inactive reason not inside HTF zone. So always when you see a thin line like this, you can just hover it over and just see the reason why that zone is being filtered out. It just gives you some clues in case you may not immediately understand why. You can see these 2 supply zones here, or 3 supply zones here, and these are the ones which are filtering out all these other supply zones. If we look on this H4, you can see we've actually got demand zones on the H1 chart, which is why these H4 zones are actually appearing active. I'm just going to get rid of the inactive ones again. Sometimes it does get a little bit confusing. The more you play with this thing, the more you kind of tailor it to how you want to use it. And there's a lot of information here, so you don't. Oops, I just set child only. I set the width to 0. I set the incorrect one there, so I set child with dailies you had before, inactive or invalid zone line width 0. Okay. And there you can see that you're going to get the H4 zones, demand zones that fall inside a daily demand zone, and the H4 supply zones that fall inside a daily supply zone. So that can be one useful way to filter out zones. We start doing the same depending on what time frame we're looking at trading. Similarly, if we only wanted to say daily zones that fell inside a weekly chart, we could look at changes to weekly. We only want zones that fall inside a weekly zone. So we go to daily here, and we're going to have to display the weekly ones so I can demonstrate what we need. So child with weekly. There's a lot of zones here, so it's actually most of them actually appear anyway. It's just wondering if we can maybe look at the even on this chart. There's a lot of zones. It's all pretty messy at the moment, and it's not easy to trade. Maybe I can just do it better on a different time frame. Sorry, a different symbol. We'll choose the euro here. We'll just change the overlap inside my time frame. True. Choose the weekly, and we will display child with the weekly. We're going to hide the inactive zones completely. Say OK. So here we've got these weekly demands, so all these demands actually fall inside a weekly one. Same on the 1 hour, I've got all these demands in there, and one of these will probably be a supply zone as well, which is the reason why we're actually seeing these supply zones here. We've only got supply zones here, demand is both there, so let's just try it on a monthly. We're going to set zone overlaps so that zones appear in a monthly only will appear. And this will probably get rid of a lot of the ones that we're looking at. You see there's really not very much because none of them actually appear inside a monthly zone at the moment, unless we shrink it together. And you can see that we've got these ones coming in to view further up here, and nothing lower down at the moment. Just change it to display the monthly zones. At the moment we're showing child with weekly, okay, child with monthly, and we don't do monthly, okay. Maybe that's something I can add in. But anyway, you get the impression, the idea that, we'll just go back to monthly. The first supply zone is at 1.0847, 1.0847, which is around about 1.084, around about there, and you can see that it's only above that level that the H4 zones come into display. Okay, so let's just have a quick look at one or two other things. I'll reset this to its default. What I'll do is I'll load in my no filters, which gives us everything back to default, but with my username and my license key. There's a couple notes here. Mode of operation, live analysis. So we're not doing trading. If we start going to auto trading, we'll be changing that to auto trading, and we'll be setting time frame for placing trades. At the moment it's set at H1, which is the default value, and it's probably my preferred time frame for trading. I'll just put this back because we're actually on a Sunday today, so the markets are closed, so there's no trading can take place. We've got a couple of different things here. We can change the definition of how zones work, or how the trend is defined. My preferred value is trend by zone, and what this is doing is really looking at the most recently touched zone to determine whether the trend is up or down, with a couple of other sort of influences on that, just to make it a little bit more accurate. For example, if price is actually closed within that zone previously, then that zone gets ignored. More traditional type methods of choosing a trend by moving averages. This actually uses a combination of a fast and a slow moving average. If we scroll down the bottom, we have the fast one set to 10 period, slow one set to a 12 period, and it's just looking at whether the fast EMA is above or below the slower simple moving average. So if it's above, then the trend is up. If it's below, then the trend is down. So that's just a different way of doing it. I can show you that on the chart. If I set trend by moving average, and the fast by 10, slow by 12, and I'll actually insert the indicators on the chart for you. So trend, moving average, 12, simple, it's going to be the slow one, and we'll do the same, indicators, trend, moving average, it's going to be the fast one. Oops, I'll set that to a different colour so it's pretty obvious what's going on. It's 12, that's the 10. That to, let's say red, fast. Make it a little bigger for you to see. You can see here, it's not that clear because it's consolidation going on, so it looks like the green has actually just gone above the red one at this last couple of candles, which would mean that the trend is actually down on this 4-hour chart. If we look over here, H4 is down. If we look for the weekly chart, we can see that the red is actually still above the green one. It's just the trend is actually up at the moment. Kind of went up here after this long series of bull candles, and it hasn't quite crossed over yet, so it is still up. And if we look at the top here, weekly is up. Same on the down, on the monthly. The red candles, red EMA is below the green SMA, so trend is down in this instance. And that kind of aligns with what we see on the chart. And some people prefer to use this method. I personally prefer the zones. I think it gives a better representation for trading supply and demand. It kind of comes back to the fact of my belief that the trend is really determined by zones rather than, and therefore we don't really want to use it to choose what zones to trade from. Trend is just a movement between areas of supply and areas of demand. Okay, just going to have a quick one look at a couple other parameters just to give you some idea of the various things we can do. There are a lot of parameters here, and it was going to take a little bit of time for you to get your head around all the things you can do, and this is of course only just actually without any auto trading in place. When it gets auto trading, you take it to a whole new level, and there are a lot of technical indicators, for example, which change tick by tick, which don't change the drawing of zones on the chart, but they do determine whether a trade can be entered on a retest or not. So we've got time of day filters here, and they're tick by tick. And when it comes for trading, auto trading, so if we've got this zone depth here, we can set, the zone is too deep, we don't want to trade it, or likewise if it's too narrow, we could say we want a minimum depth of 10, and then any zones less than 10 pips won't be printed on the chart, or be printed with a thin line depending on what width setting you've set. I'm just going to come back and I'm just going to apply my baseline, or my baseline 2 that we saved earlier, just take it back to start. I'm just going to insert a Bollinger Band and give you another demonstration of how we incorporate technical indicators against zones just to help our trading and add confidence to our trades. I'm going to add the 2 standard deviations, 20 period, which is the default setting normally in MetaTrader. Okay, that, and here we get Bollinger Bands. So one of the things we often may want to look at is only trading or only showing zones when that zone actually formed or touched outside of the Bollinger Band at the time. So I'm just wondering whether this is going to give you a good example. In this case, this one here with the D3 next to it, zone, but you see that as it formed, it was all inside of a Bollinger Band. And we kind of look at that and say, well, institutions don't tend to trade when it's kind of close to the moving average. It needs to be stretched away from moving average for them to trade. So chances are that if price does come back and retest that, then we base it on institutions having residual orders left there, but they may not have been trading that much there in the first place, so maybe that's a zone we shouldn't be looking at. So one of the parameters we have around Bollinger Bands is to say only zones touching Bollinger Bands to be active. So we set that to true now. Okay, and we should see this zone that I was just demonstrating you about here disappear completely. You see it's gone inactive. If I hold the mouse over it, it says inactive reason zone inside VB, so it hasn't touched it. You notice that this zone here, the D5 under it, demand zone, it actually just come outside, and that's why that's still included. Likewise, these ones are disabled because when they form, they are right inside this Bollinger Band. These ones are actually enabled because if we look further back, we'll probably find that they're, I don't know whether we can do that without losing it too much. Just scroll back, and here you can see it actually just touched outside the band, which is why they're still inside. See this one, the candle before went outside. This one, when the zone actually created, was actually inside the band, which is why it's disabled. So it's another example of something we can do using the parameters on the Expert Advisor. A quick look. There's a whole, what you'll see is there's a whole load of other parameters here. A lot of these are to do with auto trading. For example, position sizing. It does automatic position sizing. Stop management, you can maybe not have any stop at all. I don't recommend that, but there may be some reason why I do that. You can also use trading stops based on zones. So if you have a trade open, as zones of supply or demand form behind the price move, you may want to move your stop just to behind those zones, thinking that the zone will give some protection. And if price did break back through those zones, then you'd want to close the trade at that point, thinking that maybe the trend has changed. You've got various order limits set here, so these become more important when you have multiple charts open at once and an expert advisor trading on each of them. So you have maximum active orders 99999. There's no limit really on that. Maximum orders open for a zone. So each time price comes back when we test the zone, there is a potential for a trade or order to be placed or an order to be triggered. But we may not want that to happen. We may only, for example, want one trade to be open per zone. Similarly, a candle may form and it may come down and test 2 or 3 or more zones that are very close together at once, but we may only want one order to open from that single candle, which is why we have this maximum orders open for a candle. There's various other things. You can look at stop trades if there's a maximum daily move is being exceeded already in the direction that we're of interest. We have, scroll up further, we can close trades when various things happen. For example, at the end of a session, we can have up to 3 sessions. Some typo there, it says 21, it should be just 1, 2 and 3. When trade hits the first of the moving average or Bollinger Band, we're into that kind of price action. There's just when it hits the opposing Bollinger Band. These are where we define our sessions. This is all based on the broker time that we see when we hold our mouse over a candle. We use RSI a little bit here. We could, for example, say we can trade when price is overbought or oversold on a selection of time frames. So here we've got between H4 and weekly by demand. If we turn this to true, and then we're in auto trading mode, then it would only trade when price was overbought on those or oversold if we're looking at demand zones on these time frames that we have selected here. This is range, so from H4 to the weekly. We can have a whole range of different targets. So at the moment we've got no target set, target none, but we could set a fixed number R, where R is the distance between our entry and our stop. We could just have a set number of pips. You might think 50 pips per day is good. You may even just have a fixed price target. Maybe you're just looking at one particular zone that you're trying to trade against, and you want to go to bed and just wait and let it touch that zone, and if it does, then you're into a trade based on that. Or we can do it on zone based targets. So you may say the next H4 zone, opposing H4 zone, or the next higher time zone. So if we're trading H4, that would be the daily. If we're trading H1, it may be the H4 zone. And there's various other settings you can do. You can look at the daily move remaining. There's a bit of a calculation that goes on that works out how far price has already moved in the day in the direction you're interested in, and using an average over past days works out how much further it could possibly go. And there's other things. We can update a target if a new fresh zone forms behind price. We can change our target accordingly. We can have buffers if we want to actually get in a little bit before the zone, just to improve our chances of an order being triggered, or we can have our stop placed just a little bit above a zone, a supply zone for example, if we just want to allow for that cheeky institution just trying to take out stops. We can have no sell orders above a particular price. If we think that price has gone so far up, then we want to stop selling, then we can just enter a price range here, and similarly for the no buy orders below this price. There's a whole list of parameters here, and as I say, you're not going to learn them in one go. You just need to get used to using it. Maybe stick this in the bias ones or some of the Bollinger Bands, technical indicators to start off with, and just start playing around with it. And this is the main reason why I'm more than happy to give 1 month's trial to people who want to try using the professional version. This give a bit of time for people to get used to it, start trying it out. And if you want to ask help, then you can go to our forum, which is forum.letmebefree.com. That's probably more than enough for this session, so I'm going to leave you there, and hopefully you'll be interested enough to take a look at our free trial, download it or get it emailed to you and give it a whirl. And then if you've got any questions, come and ask them on our forum. And we've got some sort of regular users here that are very familiar with their setup. We have the book at URL book.letmebefree.com where you can look at. That will give you some more help and more information about what you can do with this very, very powerful expert advisor. So thanks for your attention, and I look forward to speaking to you again shortly. Cheers.